Great. Okay.
Hi
Well,
everybody. I'm Bonnie Walker. I'm the technical director for USA Cycling. Thank you for joining us. We had a lot of people signed up for the meeting or the webinar. Looks like we have about 35 or so that are actually on the call, which is great. I finally got to the point where it's like, maybe I should send a reminder just in case people have forgotten or didn't actually have it on their calendar. So really appreciate everybody joining. And I am going to turn this over to Tomney and Steve Eppel, who are both part of the NTC, which is the National Technical Commission. And they will host this session and we'll get started.
okay, great. Thanks, Bonnie. So thank you all for coming to this stage race webinar, which represents the road part of the USAC officiating webinar series. We decided to make this webinar closer to home for most of you. That means rather than having a view from the top, from those who've been PCPs at UCI stage races, we have selected a panel of your colleagues who have recently been chief referee at major regional stage races. So among your colleagues out there, we do have Andrew from T-Town, who's also from Canada, on board. So we're sharing our US experiences across the border there. And we have Aaron, who is from Australia, I believe. Welcome, Aaron. Good. So, so someone's already presenting, so you might want to mute your mic. Oh, thank you, David. Okay, so our discussion tonight are therefore not going to be so much about rules and regulation implementation, but really on the people skills aspects of being at a USAC amateur level stage race. And for those of you who are more interested in the UCI racing, these soft skills, I think, will be very, very helpful as you will be running races in other countries. So we're going to divide the session up into two sections. The first section, each panelist will address 4 aspects of working on a stage race crew. So how a newer official can prepare for the event, ways to onboard officials with their new assignment, how experienced officials can help out the new CR, and fostering teamwork within the crew. And I think that's very important. All of these, it leads to a better experience for all the officials that are at an event if we can do these things well. And then in the second section, each panelist will share something from their recent stage race assignment, situation, a decision, a negotiation that would be a good learning lesson or best practice. And Steve and I will both chime in about 2 UCI situations we both encountered, and I'm really anxious to hear about Steve's. I've been waiting for months for this one. So if you have questions, put them in the chat function, and Steve Eppel will collate these into unified questions after the panelist discussions. If there are things that are really specifically germane to the first section, then we'll pause between the 2 sections and Steve will then raise your question for you, okay? With that, then let's proceed to the first section. And so the first stop tonight will be Jeff Poulin, who will discuss thoughts on new officials preparing for a stage race assignment. Now, Jeff, if you haven't met him, is the man with 1,000 hats. That is in New York State. He has multiple roles as an official, race director, officials coordinator, and then the LA president. It means local association president. And if there are any holes anywhere else in the state, he will fill them. I see him everywhere. So he'll be sharing his experience as the CR for the Green Mountain Stage Race, the largest Pro-Am stage race east of the Mississippi. Wow, that's an advertisement. Jeff has been the CR GM SR 4 times now, despite serving as AR once and watching the previous longtime CR, Chris Constantino. Jeff promised himself he would never, ever put himself through such misery after seeing that. But, you know, he stepped up, filled in the hole. And so he will be doing GSMR again this year when the race director, Gary Kessler, celebrates his 23rd edition over Labor Day weekend. And if he doesn't say so, I'm going to give his advertising pitch to the Northeast officials. He is looking for Northeast officials particularly ones who haven't worked GSMR, to come and join the crew. He would love to share the joy. So when you hear him tonight, you'll hear the joy. So Jeff, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. First, a shout out to the Northeast officials from New York and New England that gave me input for this little spiel. And special shout out to Chris Constantino. Chris, I hope you're doing okay. So Green Mountain Stage Race, just a few words about what the event is. It's 4 days. Gary Kessler's the race director. He actually puts on the Killington Stage Race every Memorial Day and Green Mountain every Labor Day. They're very similar. Green Mountain's 4 stages, has about 500 participants normally, spread over 10 fields, men, women, all categories and age groups as you would expect. And it's really a national level organization and a national level atmosphere. So to add to Tom's publicity, yes, please, you really want to be there. It's a great race. We started on Friday with an uphill time trial, about 5 miles, 30-second start. So it's pretty exciting getting 500 people out the door in a short morning. Saturday and Sunday, the road race days. Saturday is a 37-mile circuit. The fields do it either 1, 2, or 3 times, so as much as 111 miles, big race. And we have 2 sprint points, a KOM, QOM, and just to make things exciting, a level crossing in the middle of it. Sunday is the Queen Stage. We go over the Green Mountains twice, 15-mile route, run down one side of the mountains, and we go up not a very high gap. It's a long grinder up and a fast descent. Then 15 miles back to this epic climb, category 1 into Appalachian Gap. And it's just something to behold because it's incredibly pretty. And then the finale is in downtown Burlington on a 6-turn, very technical 90-second lap criterium downtown course. So very fun. It takes about 22, 23 officials on the road race days to fully staff it. So it's a big crew. About 10 of those are ARs in comm cars behind the fields, and 10 of them are motos. So we need an awful lot of motos for this race as well. But there's nothing quite like it. And I hope by the end of this, if you don't want to officiate it, you at least want to ride it. So my topic, as Tom said, is what advice might I give to officials who are coming to something like GMSR or their first stage race? And the first thing I say is set some goals. I always do that. My primary goal at pretty much every race is to put on the best event I possibly can, not just for the riders, but for everyone. But if you go into a stage race, remember you've got all the disciplines available, all the positions at the disciplines. So above all, make sure the chief referee knows what you hope to accomplish at the event as well, so that you get something out of your experience that's beneficial to you. In terms of preparation, a big race like Green Mountain is a lot like any other big national level USA Cycling or UCI event. And these big events are just grander in every way to a local event that we've all done nearer to home. Obviously, you want to read everything that's sent to you, starting with a tech guide. That one's a no-brainer. But I'm a big planner. I tend to send out a lot of instructions in advance because I'm trying to plan out everything that could possibly go wrong and have a plan for it. So please read that. And if you think about it, when you got a crew of 20-something people, if everybody asks you a question or two on email, then I'm quickly staring at 50 to 70 emails that I hoped I had already answered the questions to. And likewise, when you're asked by the chief who's pulling together all this information for hotel information and travel arrangements and stuff like that, answer as quickly as you can so the chief can get that all behind him. So assuming you read the tech guide in advance, I said reread it the night before every stage for the next day's stage, because that gets everything fresh in your mind for the next day, and read the daily communique so you have the same information that everybody else has when you get out on the road. Now, things that are unique to stage races that you might want to do some homework on. You'll have a lot more assets than you normally do. You're lucky to have a pace car and a comm wheel car if you're at a local race. Well, we have like 5 vehicles, maybe 6 per field with dedicated wheel cars and neutral support and a moto. Field passes are not only lots and lots of riders, but you've also got to get, say, 10 vehicles through the pass. I mentioned level crossings. The rules in the rule book for a level crossing might work great for very quick 30-second passenger trains in Europe, but when you've got a 5-minute stop for a cargo train in New England, look quite a bit different. Keeping track of the jerseys. You not only want to know who's in the jersey, but who's competing for the jerseys, because you want to allocate the resources to them appropriately, and also make sure that's that part of the race is done as fairly as possible. And also keep track of the troublesome riders. So if someone tests your patience with the O-line on Saturday, you want to not give them a free pass on Sunday if they start testing the rule again. Of course, you can be in for any additional duties as they come along. So if any of these things aren't second nature to you, and I'm sure they're not, because they're not second nature to us, because we just don't do them all the time. look them up in the rule book, but especially when you get to the race, ask your colleagues on the best way that they apply the rule at that race. That's 4 minutes and 59 seconds, Tom.
You are awesome. You are awesome. Wow. You set a bar now for everybody else. Okay, well, next up is Orr, and Orr, this gentleman just now set the standard. Orr is going to discuss what a CR can do to help onboard officials officially, once they're at the venue. So those of you who don't know Orr lives in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and he's been officiating since 2005. He does both off-road and road and track disciplines, and he's learned from each, and he cross-transfers his skills between them. In addition to his role as an official, he has contributed to the sport in other capacities, serving as a team manager, race director, trained and mentored new officials. So he's going to be sharing his experiences from this year's tour of the Gila amateur races. So, clock's going.
Yeah, so I'm gonna concentrate on like how to bring the crew on board, just kind of like what we do, what worked for me, just kind of like from my perspective. So specifically to Gila, like I was in the amateur crew. It was my first time, and the amateur race. I mean, it was set up like it was a really nice like stage race like for the crew actually to experience, because then it was a stage race for each different category. And then basically the crew, I was the chief, but then everybody on the crew were their chiefs for that particular race. So they were like running their like small caravan. So it was a caravan, about 4 or 5 cars. So it was a really good like a learning, I see like an experience. But anyway, but the crew is like mostly, they were the locals. So like I didn't know anybody. It was like first time for me like to meet them. But anyway, so in general, like, so what we do, like how to like bring everybody on board and kind of like create that kind of cohesion. I'll start with like the first officials meeting, like when we get together. That was a great opportunity to kind of greet and welcome. Like we may always not have the opportunity to get to meet like the day before, like when that happens and we have more time. And then like then again we can socialize after it. So like that's a good, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes like we meet at the day off. But yeah, so that kind of like brings like a like a sense of like friendship, and then like then like it's like then you kind of set up a positive and inclusive atmosphere. So then that's how like you can introduce yourself for them too. So the second point is like as a chief, like kind of sharing the details, sharing the information that because like as a chief, you're in contact with the director, and then reviewing the tech guy, you spend more time than the crew. So then like when you kind of get together, like giving that information back, like giving a walkthrough, like specific stages, like that's like a good thing. Like so then like because you're sharing the information, I feel like that's appreciated, and that makes like people comfortable, and they feel more confident about performing. The other one is like going over the task assignments. I mean, you would like to share that like beforehand, so like everybody would review it, but then kind of going over it so that you kind of may get into like the specifics, or then that kind of gives the opportunity for the crew to like ask questions, like because like, once they start asking questions to your crew, then that also kind of creates like this kind of back and forth like kind of helpful environment. And as a chief, like you want to encourage the open dialogue, like teamwork, to share information, and then like you want to like also address the challenges. So it's like so those could be like the daily meetings like before the stage, and then the ones like after like the debriefs. So like that's like something like as a chief, like I share what I learned, and also like if something went wrong, like I take the chance to be like I'm the vulnerable. As like, if that went well, that didn't went according to plan, but this is what I did. This is what we'll fix. So then like once as a chief you do that, like, and then you can hear back from your crew, and then they feel that like you're open about it. And then the last one is like being available for your crew, for your guidance. Like then you have the time, like you're there available for them. I mean you're as a resource. Just like your time, that being around, and not going to your personal things, kind of like that kind of situation, like being available. And the other is like like then like, you may be the one like asking questions, like let's say at the Gila, I didn't know these newer officials. I didn't know like they probably did more of Gila than me. So then I was like, great, like, and nobody was asking questions, but then, so then I was asking questions, and I identified like one of the officials, like, hey, how did you like, this is like a great, you got your own caravan, like, how did you move? Because your race exploded. And then like, I noticed, like, I understood, like asking questions that like this official actually never created a
4
log,
minutes.
never created a log. And so like I showed him, okay, how to create the log. And he's like, okay, when does this happen? When did that happen? And like, when did you move your neutral car? So that was, so then like it kind of, I was able to kind of identify a point and give him the information. So then like in the next stages, then he was more aware of like creating the log, recording. And then like when somebody asks questions, we have the resource. So that's my 5 points. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow. That was succinct. Good for you. So next up, Tony Philippin has been very active at asking questions. So everybody else, if you have questions on these topics, chime in on the chat. So next up is Carla Gendler. So she's going to share her thoughts on ways an experienced crew can help a new CR at a stage race. So Carla lives in Austin, Texas, where she got her start in officiating in the late 2019s. And as a way to help out at the local crit series, the driveway, and added some credibility to the mentored marshaling program that she started to provide as an education and safe environment for new riders interested in crit racing. And beside officiating the local races, she's been the local assigner for the state of Texas. Wow, you're following the shoes of some pretty great people there in that role. Bonnie didn't even smile.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, but Bonnie didn't smile. They're not going to smile out of Bonnie. Okay. Carla had assignments at the major road races and even at assignments at major road race, stage races, and even a few CX races. And she's probably best known for her sweet tooth. Wow, I'm interested in that one. She'll be sharing her experience as a first-time CR for this past Tucson Bicycle Classic. Go ahead, Carla.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So I guess I took this question as kind of twofold, looking at it from two different perspectives, and the fact that I am relatively new compared to most of the people that are on this panel to officiating and what's happening. So, rather than saying what I want to look at was, as a new official, how and when do you approach the CR or any other experienced officials that are on the crew? But then also saying, hey, as me as a new CR or anybody else that's a new CR with a very experienced crew, how can they help you and what are the ways to tap into that? So from the first perspective, as a new official, how and you're coming into a race, how and when do you approach CR or any other experienced officials? Biggest thing I would say here is be humble and be honest with yourself and with the other crew members. Realize that you don't know what you don't know. And if asked to do something and you don't know what it is, to say something. We are the crew is very dependent on each other. And if you're asked to do something, it's because it's a very specific task and it needs to be done. And if you don't know what it is, there's a potential that things could fall apart. And generally, if you say, hey, I don't know what that is, people will take the time, the crew will take the time to help you, the CR will take the time and say, yeah, this is what this means, this is what we need from you, that kind of information. And then, how do you also approach the CR? Find the quiet moments. In the middle of a race when everything is blowing up and happening, that's not the time to say, hey, what's going on here? What just happened? Write your questions down. And when there's time, ask if now is a good time to go over the question or the situation that just happened. And it always is helpful, right? Because if you have that situation to talk about it, you'll find, right, breakfast, dinner, coffee runs. Even though I'm known for having an aversion to talking about bike racing after the bike race happens, it's actually a really good time to sit down and talk about it and just have the debrief, where it's not necessarily all the officials together, but to actually kind of have the one-on-one or even a smaller group experience to really sit down with CR and talk to them about, hey, how did you handle this? So, what happened? And ask those questions. one of the other things that I found that has been really helpful for me is caravanning to and from the venue, because it is that quiet moment. It's a chance you're in the car and you get to ask those questions about, what can I anticipate? What's going to happen, from asking the CR or even the CJ, anybody on that crew that could be experienced, what is it that I should be looking out for? What is it that I'm doing in this role? So to really take the time to kind of, like I said, find those moments and use them to your advantage. And then from the other perspective, as a new CR working with an experienced crew, how can they help you? Again, it's about asking questions. You don't know what you don't know, and you need to realize this. And so the big thing here is to talk to the other officials, right? That on your crew, ask them questions, talk to other CRs that have been in this role before you and ask them, what do you miss? What are the things, what are the gotchas, right? Because with every race, it's very different. And there's, especially with the regional races, there's things that happen differently and specifically based on that race. And so knowing what those are is also a very good thing as you walk into this as a CR. What are you likely to miss? Those kind of questions.
4 minutes.
Yep. And the other thing that I would say is to really rely on your panel, right? As a CR, generally in a stage race, you will have a panel because you need to make decisions. Rely on them, rely on your motors, and rely on the race organization. There's a lot of knowledge there. And they are all wanting to help because they want to put the best foot forward when it comes to putting on this race. That's it.
Hey, excellent. And Bonnie's already called you out for a great learning. Not to embarrass you. Okay. Wow. It's time for Ryan. Oh, he's been waiting for this. I've been seeing him there. Yeah, he's been prepping. Okay, so Ryan will share thoughts on developing a team atmosphere for race officials and how a new official can help blend it into the team. Ryan is based in the Bay Area of California. That's the San Francisco Bay Area because there's a lot of other Bay Areas all over the world. I was born there too, so I had that bias. It's the Bay Area. He's been officiating since 2003. Outside of that, he and Marcy Weiss have started an official podcast called the Commissaires Commentaries. So Ryan, after he gives his talk, he's going to put in the chat group how you can access this podcast series. I'm really happy you're doing it. Something that we've talked about at the Technical Commission, so it's good that you guys are doing it. So he'll be sharing his experiences at Redlands, but his favorite stage race is Tour of the Gila. And he made a comment here. The last time he was at Gila was in 2019. He served as a certain IC on this Zuminar's radio tour where he did a so-so job. So, wow, that's really bold. Honest feedback about a CR or PCP of an event, even if they do a so-so job. It's important to be able to give feedback even to the head of the race because that's how they grow. And, that honesty is very important. So, I appreciate the honesty, Ryan. So go ahead.
Okay, so the topic is about developing a team atmosphere and how does a new official blend in. For team atmosphere, it's really shaped by a couple of points. One is the type of crew members that are assigned to the event. Usually you'll get a mix of senior officials and some officials that are new. So really it's up to the experienced officials to really make sure that new officials feel welcomed, right? I remember working in Tour of California. Marilyn Allen was sort of that official that really helped me and another official feel really welcomed and integrated into the crew. So that's one part of it. If you're a new official and you don't get that, I think as an individual, make sure that you do some of the basics. Introduce yourself, make sure that you're willing to help and work well with others. So that's one component of the team atmosphere that develops. Another part that shapes the team atmosphere is sort of the type of event that you're working on. There are some events where it's sort of the hub model where all the officials congregate in one place and the races are at different places, but y'all go back to the same place. And those events, I think, are really, they're conducive to having a strong team atmosphere. A couple of you mentioned about the coffee runs, the breakfast, and food together. Those are the opportunities where that atmosphere kind of develops. There are some events where you travel from city to city. And in those cases, I think those are more opportunities to develop stronger relationships because you really don't have any other place to go because there's only a few cars and everybody just has to kind of stick together for most of the event. So those are some of the factors that kind of shape the atmosphere. Regarding the points about how as a new official you blend in, and I'll cover a few points here. One of them as a new official is just be reliable, and people will remember you for that. So one simple thing is if everybody departs at 8 o'clock, you're there at 7:50 and ready to go, and you're not the one that's holding everybody from departing. Another point is about social opportunities to socialize. Now, you don't have to be a social butterfly, you don't have to go to all of them, but there are times where the officials go out for refreshments like a beer after the event, lunch, dinner, etc. Make time to attend those socialization moments. One example I just mentioned at Tour de Gila, one of the officials just said, "Hey, let's go bowling." Right? That's an opportunity for you to get to know the crew outside of their officiating work. It's just, and again, get to know people on a personal level. Another bullet point is just get along with other people, right? Here's another example. If you're in a car, you're working with your driver. The driver may be able to see numbers better than you can, right? And so, you're working with them, they're helping you out, you're helping each other. And it just work as a team to get things done. And it doesn't cost anything to be nice to people, right? So that's one suggestion. Another bullet point is if it doesn't interfere, help other officials, right? So, sometimes if the judging crew is swamped and they're trying to get things done, offer to help get some food for them, or help if there's things you can help with reviewing their score sheets or trying to find a number. Try to help them as long as it doesn't interfere. And then my last guidance is this is one where I learned from Dave Miller. He was a very good mentor of mine at my first stage race as a chief judge at Joe Martin, and he wrote this very long and comprehensive guide on actually for the entire officiating crew on how to work together, setting expectations. These are your roles and responsibilities. And at the very last sentence in his long document, he said, "Let's relax and have a great stage race." So as a new official, you're bound to make mistakes, but that's okay. You're there to learn, you're there to have fun, and you're there to grow and be a better official. So don't always take things so seriously. There's moments to relax and make sure that you take time to do that. So those are the things I wanted to share. Thanks, Tom.
Leave it to a bunch of experienced officials to get 5 minutes down. Everybody, wow. Okay, so the only questions that I'm seeing in there is are technical ones, and maybe we should put those at the end. I mean, as everybody can see, we're really focused on soft skills. And, Bonnie, Steve, myself, and all the other people who are NTC who are listening in. I mean, when we talk about officials training, soft skills is a major topic for us. And it's the hardest thing to learn. So, we've opted to focus a lot of the discussion on this webinar on the soft skills that help make stage races more successful and make it more enjoyable for everybody. So, again, appreciate the 4 panelists' comments. So, I guess let's go to the second section, and that's insights on everybody's had on their last stage race of some situation, decision, or negotiation of note that you put in your notebook of going, that's something to remember, and something you could share to everybody else that they could also then learn from. So I'll start it off, and at the very end, we're going to have Steve share an experience at a junior race in Poland, which I've been waiting for understanding what he actually did for 3 or 4 months now since I first heard about it. So I'm waiting for it, but we'll go through everybody's stories. So I'll start with a story from a stage race in the Czech Republic from a few weeks ago. And the moral of the story is to be flexible with others' styles. It's very important. And that means for race directors too. So we've talked about being flexible with other officials, but being flexible with race directors are very important. Everybody's trying to get to the same results under the same regulations and guidelines, but sometimes adapting to an organizer's style is very important. In this situation, this stage race in the Czech Republic, the race director, the RD, is a newer international commissaire. And when I say newer, anybody that's been commissaire, got their commissaire class from 2000 onwards is newer to me. Says most of the world right now. So, she's very experienced. She knows how to run this race. I could see it right off the gun. She was very proficient, very, very organized. And, you saw that, she's under a lot of pressure. And so, stage one, we're looking at where you're sitting, and she takes the front right seat, column one. Okay, well, I've seen the style where, column one sits in the back seat. Yeah, okay. And then she runs the race from the front seat of column one. Well, I don't speak Czech, so I get that. So I was chilling in the back seat because this is how ASO runs their races. Those who've seen Tour of California, their staff are actually running the race. The president of the commissaires are pretty much an observer, just making sure that everything is done by regulation or the way UCI wants, but ASO is running it. So I'm going, okay, so here's an IC, she knows what she's doing, and she speaks Czech, I don't speak Czech. I'm going to be chill in the back seat, and I'll only intervene when, I see it's not going well. So at the post-race debrief with the Czech commissaires, I said, the one thing for today, I just want you guys to know that I might have done the barrages differently. And they all looked at me and said, well, I'm the PCP. What do you mean by that? I said, there were many voices in my car. And the radio tour person's also a candidate for being an IC, and she kind of explained that to them. And the next day, a miracle happened. The race director started turning over the race to me. There was never any conflict. I've never challenged her. And she did a good job. It's just stylistically different than what I would have done, but we're all trying to do the same thing. And so we avoided any sort of unnecessary conflict because, those of you who've been race directors, you got a lot going on. You don't need some commissaire coming in or a race official coming in and just add to your problems. It doesn't help. So to the degree that you can flex and it still all gets to the same point, work with people to ease your way in. And there's a lot of very knowledgeable RDs out there who've been doing this for 30 years, and they'll let you know that. And flex with them. So good. Well, I'll start with Ryan. Ryan, something you'd like to share?
About my experience at Redlands. So Redlands has been an event held for about 37 years. And going in as a newer chief referee, there were, I think, 2 points I want to share. One is basically the sort of the Hippocratic oath, which is don't do any harm. And the reason is because this event has a strong body of really experienced they have a strong organization. The promoter, he's done it many, many times. So really, they know what they're doing. And I think some of you have heard about the analogy where the organizer, they have the car, they have the sports car, and they're giving you as the chief referee the keys to the car. You really want, and for me, it was, okay, I don't really want to crash this car. So really just going in, it is more about how can I be of service and help where needed to the organization. And there were several occasions with registration, with some of these logistical things, I could help take sort of those tasks away from them to help them. That was my goal. The other one point that I wanted to share was, let me look at my notes, was plan and not react. That's an important mantra. The more you plan, the less on race day you're going to have to fight fires. And I thought I had done a lot of planning, and part of that was in the previous year. I was observing how Mitch was the previous chief referee. I was observing how he was planning the event. I looked at his notes, and I used that as a base to plan for the event. But there are a lot of surprises that go along the way. I think some of that comes with experience, but really no harm, no foul. If you didn't necessarily plan for it, you just have to be able to rely on your crew and work cooperatively with the organization to resolve those issues. So those are 2 points that I wanted to share and my experience with Red Days. Thanks.
Great. Well, we'll move on to Carla.
So mine comes from, like I said, Tucson Bicycle Classic. My takeaway message, there were a lot from that because that was really my first time being a CR at a regional level stage race. So it was there's a lot of learning going on. And my big takeaway from that was stand by your decisions and be ready to defend them. Be ready to have that rule book there so you know what rules you are applying. You're not going to make everyone happy with the decisions you would make, but as long as you can support them, you yourself are going to be able to walk away feeling good about them. And the story that comes from this is, so Tucson is a regional stage race. They're trying to take it to a national level. They have, 500-600 racers there. It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but with it being a very local race, the Friday day is time trial day held during the day. And it's a pretty big junior race. And so students can't get out of school to go and do this race because it's high school and they have their commitments and all of that. Or there are people coming in that may not be able to make it. And what had happened is weeks before, we had a rider reach out and ask if, they were coming with their team and they had an exam medical board exam that morning, and was wondering if they could get a later TT start time. And trying to take into account the needs of the race organization, because they don't want to say no, because they want the racers to show up. You're kind of, as a CR, you're left, okay, how do we handle this? And it was sign up and we'll figure out how to handle it. And I had made the decision that the rider would be given a later start time and allowed to race. In Tucson, generally, as I'm from Tucson, the weather tends to get worse during the day, like the wind and everything picks up. So I was like, oh, this won't be too bad. Except for that day was the day that the weather got better and the wind was more favorable. And so this individual was allowed to ride an hour and a half after the group that she was in had ridden, and of course posted up this phenomenal time. And there was a lot of complaints and protests and all of that. So how did I handle it? It was, I talked with the panel, and actually it was Dot. I have to say Dot Abbott was the one that really helped me with this, to say, really the rules are, if you're going to protest a start or a time or anything like that, it's before the actual race happens. And so I had to make this call of, this rider rode, didn't want to negate the decision I had made, but to also say to these individuals, these other riders in the field that were very upset because the more favorable conditions that, the time to protest is before. And of course, they did not like that answer. And it actually got escalated to USA Cycling. I didn't know about this. It was quite an exciting time. But, it was one of those very big learning experience. And through this, what I gained from that and from the feedback I had received is that you do want the riders to ride. And in a time trial, the best thing to do is to let them ride, but be told that if you're going to make an accommodation like this, that they ride, but they will be given the slowest time of the person in that group. So that way they are allowed to ride, they can continue to compete. You know, we had already had in place with the individuals that couldn't make it, the students that they didn't have to make it, but they would be given the time plus 30 minutes of the slowest rider, so that way they could still continue on. But just to always, again, to go back to like plan for these exceptions, that people are going to want that. And how to best handle all of that, and just be ready to defend it, and be ready to realize people are not going to be happy. But like I said, as long as you have a decision and you know the rules and you can point to the rules, you yourself can walk away feeling okay with everything. That's it.
Great. Wonderful. Let's move on to Or.
So like for me, what I can say is the from like the Gila day, the Gila time, kind of like how kind of Jeff kind of pointed out, like working with the organizer, working with the volunteers, working with the crew, and I just kind of want to point, like, they also like are a resource for you, and they've been doing this like for many years, so they know it like much better than you. So my experience, it became, so we we had our own caravans, and then I had like 2 mutual support vehicles, and then those like drivers, like, so like it all exploded on the climbs. But then what I kind of like came to notice is like they actually do their like job so well, like they know how to use the radio. So like I basically asked them, okay, can you give me the picture of what's happening? And then so I was able to like they position them, and then they were giving me like a good communication. Plus, they were responding to my time marks because they did it in the past so many times. So they were really experienced. They were really helpful. Just kind of think that they've been there for many years. They've been doing this, like, and they know what they're doing, and so they'll be a resource for you. The other thing, I'm just kind of like a small, like maybe like a point, like that kind of building the friendship, like bringing everybody on board. I just want to point, like, that takes some time. Like that we all need to kind of give the time, like, as a chief, yes, like I need to, but as the crew too, like when you're crew members, especially like, I was in that same situation when the Nature Valley was in Minnesota. I was the local one. Then I go home and like I have my stuff because I think that it's in town. But then I was not given my time to spend the time with the crew. So then like I had the same situation happen with the Gila. A lot of my crew was the locals, so I couldn't spend the time with them to kind of get to know them, to talk more about it. So I was like, like we gotta like take the time to kind of establish, like, we all need to give our time. So then like that will like happen. So then we can get to know each other, and that will kind of be a positive influence, like going into the events.
Hey, great, Or. So, Steve, I just remember this email in April. I'm off to Rome, and then I'm going to a race in Poland, and I have no communication from Poland, so we'll find out. So I've been waiting for bated breath since late April.
Sure. Well, yeah, it was kind of a unique experience. Usually, you have a lot of information at your disposal before you go to an event, and you're able to do a lot of planning in advance and put a lot of thought into it and understand what you're getting into. In this case, I had reached out to the race organization very early after I received the assignment. Probably a month and a half later, I finally got a response after a few follow-up emails. It's very brief. I was able to at least get my flight information sent, and then got a draft of the tech guide that was a kind of the front end boilerplate stuff in the tech guide, with no real specifics about what the race really was all about. And that was all I had to review. So I reviewed it and sent back my comments, and of course I never really heard anything. And so I'm just, I'm emailing, and I'm getting nothing. And eventually it's right before the event, and emailing again, and hey, kind of like to have some of these, registration forms for the athletes, and 72-hour forms, and a couple of those trickled in, along with, a name of someone that's going to meet me at the airport. So at least I had something going on, but I really had very little information about the race in advance, right? I didn't know what, other than there was 4 stages, I didn't know what those stages were all about. And I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of time once I got to the race right before that, that was in a different country, to try and do any research. So all the research I had to do had to happen before I left the States. And so I ended up doing a lot of internet sleuthing. And there was very limited information on the internet I found. This race was restarting after being off for a couple of years because of COVID. And so no idea who was the last president of the panel for that race. I couldn't email somebody and say, hey, who did this last time? And nobody remembers. And it was kind of this race in Poland that, people don't even know about, because there's so many races over there, right? In Europe compared to the US. So, I would say that, the best thing you can do is just keep doing your searches on on the internet, see what you can come up with. Are there any YouTube videos? I wasn't able to find anything useful there. Pro cycling stats, try and find out something there. That was very limited. I did eventually find a website for the club that sponsors the race, even though the race itself didn't have a dedicated website to it. I was able to find that, and of course, none of it was in English. But I could use a translator to try and translate that web page and then hunt through it and dive through the different links in order to figure out, well, there's a little bit of past information there and a little bit about the upcoming race. And at least I got some city names. And so I could figure out, based on the city names of the starts and finish, that it was a probability that there was all road stages and probably no time trial. So I kind of had that going for me. And but that was about all I could do. And I could see where the cities were on a map, and that they were all within driving distance of one sort of town. So I could make the assumption that I was probably going to be in the same hotel the whole time I was there. And I was happily, I was correct about that. So I didn't have to, pack up and move from hotel to hotel every day. It was all in the same area, which was nice. I think if I were to go through the same experience again, I would probably use more of the translation services that are out there on the internet. And even if there's a possibility that translation might be off slightly, it'll get the point across, right? So I would probably start out writing my emails in English, do the translation, drop that into the email, so I've got the English and the other languages, and then ask if anybody can really handle the English, and then I can drop the translation, and then try and establish communications that way. Because the few responses that I did get back were reasonably well written in English, right? But I think what they were doing was handing it off to someone that spoke English to do some intermittent responses. Other than that, I think most of my emails were just ignored, right? Maybe they were all just hoping that the American guy would go away. Not sure. Hard to say, right? But I would certainly do things differently, having been through that process again. But what's interesting is I listen to the comments of the other panelists. They pick up a lot of the things that were kind of spot on how I had to approach it once I got on site, right? You kind of have to get the feel and the read of the race once you get there, the people, the participants, how it is that they're approaching things. And I could tell pretty quickly by asking some questions and seeing how they were approaching it, that they had their system down. And from my standpoint, as long as their system is bracketed somewhere within a range of the acceptable, then I'm not going to try and demand that their system changes for no reason, right? Because their system is working for them. I can see it in front of my eyes that there's a flow there, that it's working. So it's more on me to be flexible to make sure that the event is successful rather than make them be successful and have them learn a new process. That might turn into disaster when it doesn't need to be a disaster, right? And Tom made some great comments there, kind of along that line of reading them and that flexibility as well. And I totally agree with that. Talking about, protocols of, sitting in the back seat or whatever it is. It's interesting because they made the assumption that I would want to be the back seat sitting president. So here I am sitting in this too big BMW lengthwise that they had found somewhere. It was a Mercedes, I think, but the thing was set up like a limousine. It was enormous. And they had the seats pushed back and they're like, well, you want to be in the back seat, right? I can't see out of this thing, but it actually, just the way they had it set up, I actually couldn't do it out of the front at all. It was kind of a mess that way. So the back actually was just fine, but I had to be flexible in order to make that work out. So it did all work in the end, and just reading the flow of things and seeing how the event went, asking a lot of questions anytime I found anybody that spoke English, just to read on it was definitely a very helpful thing that worked it out in the end. Tom, I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of a.
There goes. And I think that's a good example for people going into a race that doesn't have much communication with you, or you're frustrated going into it, and you just need to keep your cool hat on and be very flexible.
Yeah.
Good. So Jeff, you're batting cleanup on the panel, and then we might do something a little different to end the night.
Okay. Well, it's actually good that I'm going last because I get to kind of go, yeah, what they said. My two best practices or experiences were really already touched on by everybody. The first one is, I mentioned I asked feedback from the Northeast officials on what should I talk about, and every single one of them across the board said the best thing about being at a stage race is the camaraderie amongst the officials' crew. And that was just great to hear. I think there are a couple of things in addition to what Ryan said in terms of helping to build that camaraderie. One thing we do, I inherited the tradition, but it's a daily post-race meeting where we do a wash-up of what happened that day. And we go around the table, everybody gets a couple of minutes to talk about something that happened to them, good or bad, and maybe solicit advice from the crowd. And I think it's a real good team building experience. We get a lot of good feedback on that. But one of the things that helps us pull that off is the last couple of years we've been staying at the same lodge. So all the officials lodging, staying together, having dinner together. We throw a big barbecue one night. The race director, Gary Kessler, comes by and, says a few words of appreciation to the crew. So everybody feels like a team. And that's really very important. The other thing is I started off by mentioning one of my goal pretty much at every race is to put on the best experience for all. And despite these stage races being really big deals, they're not the tour. So we have to make concessions all the time and do things possibly in a non-standard way to make the community happy, maybe deal with some constraints that the race director has to deal with, or to accommodate riders. I'd love to let the family members, mom and dad, follow the junior field in the family car. We can't go that far, but we really do need to temper how we handle discipline issues and how we're dealing with the riders. One of my main goals, especially with non-competitive riders or riders that have a very unfortunate mishap, is not send them home. Keep them in the race if at all possible. So, they've got a big investment in time and money coming to a race like GMSR. We want to keep them in the race, but like Carla mentioned, slowest time plus an hour. We've done that a couple of times to keep riders in the race. Telling the neutral car, hey, you can drop back off the field you're supporting to get that rider that's currently stranded on the side of the road, at least back to the start line, and we'll take care of them so they can start the next day. They won't be competitive in the stage in the overall competitions anymore, but at least their weekend isn't ruined. And they go home happy and hopefully come back next year and give it another go. So I think that's it.
Oh, great. Wonderful. So Ryan just put in the chat the email that you can all like send your request to be part of the podcast series that me and Marcy are doing. And I'd like to see do a little variation on our plan here because Mr. Manning, Tom Manning, put a very interesting comment in the chat. And you know, I'm staying away from more technical things because we're talking about soft skills, but Todd had been at the CIC Tour International Feminine de Pyrenees. So I don't know, Todd, if you would be in a position to comment more on it, or are you totally muted
Yeah,
up?
be happy to. So the race itself it's a very hard race. At a high level, just for those who are not familiar, there were some issues, failures with the protocols that were happening with the security between the security motos, the gendarmes, and the race regulator. This caused a lot of angst amongst the riders as well as the folks who were driving vehicles. And so stage 2 ended up having a 24K neutral, and then things they were dramatically better on stage 2. And stage 2 was very much like most of the races that we have worked here in the United States, with the exception, I believe, of Tour California, some of the big tours where we have a lot of police presence out front. The point that I want to bring up about the soft skills here was the work that was done by the UCI commissaires that were present. There was a number of national commissaires from the French Federation that were also present, but the UCI comms were doing yeoman's work for appeasing once the decision was made by UCI that this race with the third and final stage was going to be canceled. And I'll leave some discussions out because it's not my place to bring them up. But the commissaires did a fantastic job of being diplomatic about conveying the message from UCI, and it was a hard message, and it was a very difficult message. At the same time, they brought up, here's where we all could have been doing some things differently, including the comms themselves, including the race organization, and including the director sportifs and the riders that the director sportifs were present, and the rider reps from CPA were also present. So that is another huge thing that, as officials and the lead official of a race crew, that we need to be thoughtful about, is not taking a side, but doing your job and then having people walk away in a mood that they may not be happy, but they don't feel like they're to blame. And they walk away with hopefully an attitude of, let's make this better next time.
Okay, great. That's great that you had a firsthand observation of what we saw all over the cycling press. So it's very helpful. Steve, I think that we pretty much accomplished what we set out to do.
Did.
Okay, good. And as we said early on, we really are focusing on the soft skills side and not the technical side. And if you want to do a webinar more on the technical side of stage race, you know, let Bonnie know or an NTC member know, and, you know, could be structured to have more technical discussion. But, you know, we opted with the panelists' agreements to be much more on the soft skills side. And that's something that really will help make races just more fun for everybody, race directors, riders, and officials. And I'll say this, I know that when the officials are having a good time with the organization, the writers and the race directors get it, and they're nicer too. And so your ability as race officials to make it a smooth and low conflict situation helps make the event something that works for everybody. Any final comments, Steve?
Yeah, I would say that you can almost think about this just like you think about going to work, right? If you look how people progress in their careers, you know, the more people advance in their careers and at a higher levels, it's generally to a large degree, not necessarily on the strength of their technical skills, but in the strength of their people skills and soft skills. And so the cycling, refereeing, officiating is really not any different than that. And our ability to deal with other people effectively is what really makes the difference here.
Great. And Bonnie, turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom and Steve, as well as the panel. I think this was a great seminar, well thought out. Hopefully everybody on the call was able to take something away from it. And I can't emphasize enough the soft skills. That's something that we talk about a lot, but it's really hard to teach. It comes from learning and watching, and it's all about treating people the way you would like to be treated type thing. A lot of that comes into play. So hopefully you guys have picked up a few points, and hopefully we'll see some more of that in the future. So with that said, I am going to stop the recording. This will be available on our officials page on USA Cycling once it's been processed. And we'll put a link to it in the next tech director tech director update in case you can't find it. So thanks everybody for joining. Have a good rest of the evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bonnie.